Thank you. If you will find your seat, if you haven't already. This morning we're beginning a look in Proverbs. I've titled the, study, message, whatever, In Search of Wisdom. For those of you who have been here when I've started a series, you know that I like to go back and try to give a little background, put in a little context if I can. This is a study that I feel like I would need to go back to Genesis 1, to be honest with you, but I won't go back that far. I could go to Abram and God's calling of Abram and his calling to have a people that would be an example for him, but I won't go that far. I just kind of want to go back to an evening in which Solomon's one-day father just couldn't sleep. He was restless. The kings were out at battle. He should have went. He didn't. He was restless. He gets up from his bed and he starts walking around and he spies Solomon's one-day mother taking a bath. She is a beautiful woman. He has power. He has authority. He ends up getting what he wants. I don't blame him totally. It takes two. But having said that, that's maybe irrelevant to the story, may not be. But they end up having an adulterous relationship. What makes it worse, she ends up pregnant. Probably what makes it even worse is her husband's out doing battle. So he and everyone else would know it's not his. So somehow, some way, there's kind of a cover-up hatched. And, to make a long story short, she obviously has the baby and the baby dies as an infant. And you're left with David and Bathsheba, their sin, their guilt, their shame. And I'm sitting here thinking, if I'm God, I'm done with them. I can find somebody else a little better. I said Wednesday night, it was a very small crowd. If you were here, excuse me for repeating myself if you were here Wednesday night. But in our prayer time, I said Wednesday night, I am so sick of people saying to me, I'm not qualified to teach. I will expand that. I am so sick of people saying to me, I'm not qualified to do God's work. And my argument would be this: the only way you are not qualified to do God's work is if you think you're qualified to do God's work. Then we don't really need you, to be honest with you. I mean, keep coming and throw your money in the plate, but don't try to do anything because you're just really a nuisance to the entire kingdom. Here's two guys that I better not say that in our society. Here's a man and a woman that they did everything wrong to start with. It seems like it was a disaster. We wouldn't want them working with our youth. We wouldn't want them working with our children. We wouldn't want them teaching a marriage enrichment class. We probably would honestly call them useless if we didn't know the names and didn't know the story. But something wonderful happens that makes me so thankful, and it should make you thankful as well, that I am not God. And there is a God that handles things a little differently than we would. I want to go back in this background to 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 24. This child has died. David, Bathsheba are hurting. I'm sure they're playing the games and asking the questions. But it says in verse 24, "Then David comforted his wife Bathsheba, and he went to her and made love to her. She gave birth to a son, and they named him Solomon. The Lord loved him, and because the Lord loved him, He sent word through Nathan the prophet to name him Jedediah, which translated means loved by the Lord." That's the start. That's the start. That's the resume. Here's what you need to know about my parents. Here's who they were. Here's what they did. That's how it starts. And Solomon becomes the son of promise. Solomon becomes, at the death of David, the next king. And we fast forward over to 1 Kings chapter 3. And we read what happens in the beginning of his reign. 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 1, and I promise in a few minutes I will be getting to Proverbs. "Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married his daughters. He brought her to the city of David until he finished building his palace and the temple of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem. The people, however, were still sacrificing at the high places, because the temple had not yet been built for the name of the Lord. Solomon showed his love for the Lord by walking according to the instructions given him by his father David, except that he offered sacrifices and burned incense on the high places. The king went to Gibeon to offer sacrifices, for that was the most important high place, and Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream and said, 'Ask for whatever you want me to give you.' Solomon answered, 'You have shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in heart.'" I'm sorry, I got to laugh. Anyway, I'll just laugh and move on. "You have continued this great kindness to him and have given him a son to sit on his throne this very day. Now, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. But I am only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours?" The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, "Since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. And if you walk in obedience to me and keep my decrees and commands as David your father did," again, chuckle, chuckle, "I will give you a long life." Then Solomon awoke and he realized it had been a dream. He returned to Jerusalem, stood before the ark of God's covenant, and sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. Then he gave a feast for all of his court. Wow. I don't know if any of you take this personal, but that's convicting to me. It's convicting to me because I remember being a young preacher. I remember being scared to death. I remember standing over here in this old building and being scared to death. I remember the times that I would pray and ask God for wisdom. I remember the times that I would pray and just ask God that whatever I would do, He would receive honor and glory. But something happened during that time. I mean, I still needed God's wisdom, but I don't feel like I need to ask for it as much as I used to. See, I'd done it a lot. I'd gotten comfortable. I remember moving out here to the gym and that rickety stage we were on. I remember praying and asking God for wisdom. Because it was new, it was different, more people were coming. But after a while, I didn't need to ask anymore because I'm kind of smarter. I remember moving in here and dedicating this place and asking God for wisdom. But I got to admit, as I read these verses, I don't ask God for wisdom like I used to. I think I got it handled now. I think you need a preacher above all else that doesn't have a clue what he's doing and can only count on God for help. I believe those of you who sit in Bible studies, the kind of teacher you need is someone who just doesn't have a clue what he or she is doing, but simply ask God for wisdom and ask God for guidance. I'm humbled as I read these verses because in my mind anyway, I see at least 3 mistakes that a young Solomon made. He made an alliance or an agreement or some kind of relationship thing with Pharaoh. That was a mistake. He became Pharaoh's son-in-law. That was a mistake. He sacrificed in the high places. Now there's some arguing about that. I would say that's a mistake. I wonder, as a young king, did he know he was making the mistakes? Or did he just make them and not even know? There's many times in my life I've sinned and I knew clearly I was sinning, but you know what? I'd discover I sin and not even know it. I find it phenomenal that just at the right moment, God shows up to a person who is working on being an idiot king, and he says, "What do you want from me?" Don't you find that fascinating? What do you want from me, young king? I love Solomon's attitude at this point. What Solomon understands at this point in his life is, I'm young, God. I can't do this. I'm not smart enough. I'm not experienced enough. I don't have a clue what I'm doing. You have put me in a position where I don't have a clue how to do what I'm doing. So, yes, and I don't know how this worked, but I could just see in Solomon's mind he does the checkoff list. What I need more than anything else is wisdom, so that I will do the right thing. God is pleased with this. And God gives Solomon wisdom to the point that his wisdom was worldwide famous in that day. The point that to this day and time we still study about his wise sayings. All because he sought God and he wanted wisdom. This is not really the message, church, but as I was thinking about it this morning, I really felt impressed that we need to ask, how often do we seek God for wisdom? And I'm afraid that the older we get and that the more we've done the job we've done, we tend to forget that it's God that gives wisdom. And it only comes from Him. Give your servant a discerning heart, Solomon said, to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. I don't call what I do government here, but I will tell you what, I need to distinguish between right and wrong. I need a heart of discernment. I need God to fill me with the stuff that only God could fill me with. And Solomon begins his journey on the right path. A quick glance at Proverbs. Who? Solomon, for the most part. If you read and if you study, you will know why I'm saying to you this will be topical. I'm not going to try to go verse by verse through Proverbs. But it's primarily written, composed, compiled, whatever, by Solomon, son of that adulterer and adulteress. But the son who said, you know what, my dad taught me. I'm kind of rambling, but doesn't that tell us we need a bunch of messed up people teaching messed up people? The who is Solomon. The what, it's a collection of Proverbs. I love what someone said about it because I never thought I would use this word in a sermon, but someone described Proverbs as this: they are a collection of pithy statements about how life generally works. Pithy. Like a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. We know that's got nothing to do with birds. It's just a collection of sayings, of observations, of statements that will tell us how life generally works. And I was also thinking about this week. In all the years I've pastored, I have never put up a triple warning. But here it is. Warning, warning, warning. Proverbs are not promises. They are proverbs. And let me tell you why I want to spend some time dealing with this issue before we ever start studying. I think that most major false doctrines can trace their roots back to Proverbs. You pull out a proverb here, you pull out a saying here, and I've just got 3 examples that I would like for you to just see, and then you can draw your own conclusion. Proverbs chapter 3. Verses 1 through 4. Solomon writes, my son, do not forget my teaching, but keep my commands in your heart. For they will prolong your life many years and bring you peace and prosperity. Let love and faithfulness never leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Then you will win favor and a good name in the sight of God and of man. See, now we have to ask ourselves a few questions. Do all righteous people have a good name before man? No. Do all righteous people live in peace and prosperity and favor? But see, that guy at 2 o'clock in the morning, and if you can't sleep like I do, you know who I'm talking about. He's got the slick back hair, looking sharp, $10,000 suit. He'll sit there and tell you, you just obey the commands of God, and part of that's going to somehow get around to sending him money. And you are going to have peace, and you're going to have prosperity, and he's going to be right here somewhere camped out in Proverbs. And he's trying to, either he is deceived, or he's trying to deceive people into thinking this is more than a proverb, when it's simply just a promise. I actually heard old slick-haired guy do this one night. Proverbs 10, 3 and 4. And yes, I'm a little jealous over the hair. Proverbs 10, 3 and 4. The Lord does not let the righteous go hungry, but He thwarts the craving of the wicked. Lazy hands make for poverty, but diligent hands bring wealth. He gets up from his chair, and here's what he says. This is telling us that God's people need to get off of their, you know what, reach in their back pocket, take out their billfold, send Him a donation, and God is going to bless you with prosperity. And God's going to pour out His money. God's going to pour more money. Has anybody ever thought in here, if God just pours out that money to people who give, why don't He send it to us? And again, there are so many questions here. Have we ever known a righteous person to go hungry? Have we ever known a righteous person to starve to death? There are righteous people today in third world countries, in Muslim countries, in Hindi countries that can't get a job and they are starving to death. This is a proverb. Have you ever known a lazy person to have everything? Some knucklehead that's never struck a lick wins the lottery. There's some trust fund baby that granddaddy and daddy and mama's left him or her a bunch of money, never worked a day in their life, and they're never going to. We got to be careful when we turn this into promises. I set you up just simply to give you one more example. And you're more familiar with the King James, but Proverbs 22:6. Start children off in the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it. I can honestly say to you, I had to say it at the early service, this will be the first and last and probably only time I'll ever say this in my ministry. So here goes, and just give me a chance before you totally turn me off. Parenting is overrated. See, some of us have this idea that our kids' salvation is based upon us. It's not. It's not. Each and every one of us, we have to make a decision personally as it relates to our relationship with Jesus. I'm not responsible for my kids' salvation. I can help them. I can guide them. I can do all these kind of things. I can try to do the right things. But you know what, parents, especially you like my age and older, we need to get some freedom from feeling guilty about who our kids are. We're not responsible for what they decide to do. And at one point in the life of the church, we would hold adult leaders responsible for what adult kids do. We can't find a biblical case anywhere where my faith is going to save my kids or my lostness is going to doom them to hell. My kids are not going to heaven or to hell based upon what I do. We need some freedom. Oh, but I know it says train it. Yes, it does say that. And this is a proverb. This is an observation, but it doesn't work all the time. And if you just read about the kings of Israel, you see this. If you start reading through, what you're going to discover, Hezekiah, one of the greatest king, godly king. Train a child up in the, he has this guy Manasseh, and there's a long story there. It's not about this. He turns out to be the worst king ever. And then that man's grandson turns out to be what most people think the greatest king ever other than David. And we see this bouncing back and forth. Parenting is a great responsibility. We should train our kids up in the way they should go, but we also shouldn't beat ourselves up if they don't do how we've trained them to do. My dad trained me to eat, drink, and be merry because you are about to die. Some of you who were raised in church had some advantages that I didn't have. But it's still up to each individual to make that decision. Parents, quit beating yourselves up over what the kids do or don't do. It's pretty cool though, isn't it? Especially being raised in church. Raising kids, it's pretty cool to think, man, well, because of me, my kids are going to heaven. Now, come on, y'all. That's pretty cool. Don't you think so? Because of me, I drug them into church. I had them quote that prayer. They're going to heaven. Okay, if you choose to play that game, because of me, my kids worry when they shouldn't. Because of me, my kids say stupid things because they shouldn't. Because of me, my kids are full of anxiety and phobias because that's what they saw from me. Because of me, my kids will disobey God at times because they've seen me disobey God. Because of me, my kids will lose their temper and maybe in some cases throw things, in some cases act like a little baby. They take both of those from me. Because I can act like a little baby and throw things. That's what little babies do. It always makes sense to me. Because of me and my wife, they were delivered into a world of sin, and not only that, they are sinners. Okay, so I've got it out of my system. Take it for what it's worth. For those of you who still think you're responsible, good luck. I just don't want it on me at all. whom, I think we'll read in Proverbs, it's written to Solomon's sons. And most people think the idiot that would take over, that would basically cause civil war in just a matter of days, because he didn't listen to him. But we will read over and over again in many occasions where he talks about, to my sons. Why? To make them wise, and in the process, to make us wise. Once again, I will say the Bible's not written to me, but it's written for me. It's to make them wise. Wisdom is very important. As I have been reading Proverbs, some of the questions I've been asking myself as I look at these verses, what verses apply to me today? I ask myself, okay, what mistakes have people made, and I can see it right here and not make the same mistakes? I ask myself, what can I do to avoid being in this situation? I ask myself things like, have I seen this in my own life? And what can I do? I ask myself, trick question, ready? How do I get wisdom? Ask. I'm worried about what God wants me to do. Ask. I'm worried, should I do this or not? Ask. I'm worried about, is my attitude right? Ask. I worry about, am I loving people? Ask. God, why do you want me to do this open door? God, what do you want me to do with this closed door? God, how do you... Ask. And I keep going back to my sorry old self. Because I used to ask those questions. But you know what? I'm older and wiser now. After all, I'm using glasses now. I'm not sure what to do with them when I don't need them. But so why should I ask now? I'm working on 33 years as a pastor. Surely I've seen it all. Surely I know how to handle everything. So quickly, we come to this amazing book chock full of wisdom, of observations, of Proverbs, written by a man who in his early reign said, God, I need wisdom. Written by a man, as you well know, will not end well. But it doesn't mean we don't listen. It doesn't mean we don't study. It says, and we begin just real quickly, understanding that if you don't ask, we're toast. But just in a way of introduction, 3 steps to wisdom. Number 1, fear the Lord. In Proverbs, the first 7 verses of chapter 1, it says this: the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, for gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight, for receiving instruction in prudent behavior, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to those who are simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. Let the wise listen and add to their learning. Let the discerning get guidance for understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and riddles of the wise. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. A pithy little saying, an idiot spits in the wind. The truth, you are a total fool if you don't fear God. That's it. And I'll tell you what, you know, if you've been around here a long time, I love to talk about the love of God more than anything in this world. If I had one sermon to preach and that was it, it would be about the love of God. But we also need to understand God is a consuming fire. And God is holy. And God is righteous. And God sent His Son into this world to die for sin. So how do you think God feels about sin? Years ago, a group got started, and I thought it was the greatest name I'd ever heard. MAD. Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And it was a group of people that they had seen their life shattered by drunk driving. And they're mad. I thought that was incredible. And they set out to try to do something about the problem. God sent His Son into the world because we are sinners. Jesus died for our sin. There is a loving Abba Father, but there is a consuming fire God that is holy. And we don't talk about that enough. When you talk about the fear of God, boy, you better start talking about it. And I know that somebody in here is going to say, well, that's the Old Testament God. Okay, well, a couple of things I want to say real quickly. And I could stay a long time on this, but I'm going to go on. Consider Jesus' BFF, John. That's best friend forever. You know, there was like 12 of them, then there was 3 of them, and then the guy leaning on his breast at the last, that was John. And John reminds us that they were BFFs. John saw what Jesus did. John saw the miracles. John leaned up against Him. John had a unique relationship with Him, I believe. Jesus dies. He's resurrected. Years later, John's on this island, and Jesus shows up. And John doesn't run up and say, hey, BFF. John doesn't run up and give him a bear hug. John falls at His feet as if he was dead, and he doesn't get up until he's told to get up. That is the New Testament God that we forget. Jesus says, it's recorded in Matthew 10, do not be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. That's God. That's God talking to us about God. And that's the Son of God saying, look, you better fear God. It's a serious, serious thing. And I think what we've done as a society is we've kind of taken the fear of God out of everything. Because God is love. Oh, and He is. But there's a fear. There's a fear. You know, we got some lineman students here this morning. We had some at the early service. They're going to be taught a lot about dealing with high voltage electricity. And it can be a great rewarding thing, or it can kill them. I'm scared of low voltage electricity. I've got 3 or 4, either they're electricians or they claim they are, that have helped me at my house before. And you know that little plate that goes on that plug-in? That's as far as I go. They tell me, now look, you can flip the switch and you're going to be, oh no, I won't be. I'm not about to do it. If it depends on me, I'll change it. But other than that, somebody else is coming in. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't want to mess with it. I don't want to die by electric shock. I mean, there are ways I don't mind going, but that's not one of them. And so I have a fear of electricity. If I think something's going wrong with the electricity in my house, I'll find somebody to come and tell me, is something going wrong? I've got a fear. It's not anything about a reverence or a healthy respect. It's a flat-out fear. This past week in this cold weather, I mentioned this at the early service. You know, I've got this plumber that's always helped me out in the past. Well, he's getting old. He can't move like he used to. So I left the faucets dripping this week, just in case. Because as you would expect, I know absolutely nothing about plumbing. I think that a lot of times all we hear is God is love, God is love, God is love. It really doesn't matter what we do, and that is just not biblical. The fear of the Lord, I don't believe for a minute that, I don't think for a minute when John fell down in front of Jesus there at Patmos that was a healthy respect. I think that was a fear. Be afraid. Be very, very afraid. Because I think the reality is this: when you truly fear God, then you're going to follow God. Sometimes, why don't I do what I'm supposed to do? God loves me. Anybody ever been there besides me? God's going to love me anyway. Once saved, always saved. God's got my back. Okay, so I might lose a little reward or something. I might have to clean toilets in heaven for a year or two, but after that, I'll be good. We get all kind of these weird thinking about God, and the bottom line is, when we really understand who and what God is, and the more we know about God, the more we want to follow Him. Proverbs 3:5-7 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your path straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil." It seems like to me that America's biggest problem is Trenton First Baptist's big problem. It's my big problem. We're self-reliant. We think in America we can do it ourselves. We think in church we can do it ourselves. I think I can do it myself. And yet what Solomon is saying is, trust in the Lord. You got to turn away from your own understanding, because in the next several weeks in this study, here's what we're going to discover. We are going to discover that the way the world wants us to do things is totally opposite from what God wants. And we're going to discover that God will bless us, and God will guide us, and God will help us, and God will just pour out if we simply do it the way He's told us to do it. That's relationships. That's emotions. That's finances. That's every area of our life. Now, it doesn't mean we're going to be filthy rich and we're going to have every great health, but it means God is going to pour out His blessings on us. In Proverbs chapter 1, verse 20, "Out in the open, wisdom calls aloud. She raises her voice in the public square. On top of the wall, she cries out. At the city gate, she makes her speech. How long will you who are simple love your simple ways? How long will mockers delight in mockery and fools hate knowledge? Repent at my rebuke. Then I will pour out my thoughts to you. I will make known to you my teachings. But since you refuse to listen when I call, and no one pays attention when I stretch out my hand, since you disregard all my advice and do not accept my rebuke, then in turn I will laugh when disaster strikes you." I think wisdom is nothing more or nothing less than God crying out to His people. I think it's God crying out that says, repent, turn your life around, call on me. You want guidance, I'll give it to you, but you've got to call on me. You want help, seek me. Let me see that you want to change your thoughts and change your life, and then I'll help you do it. But I'm crying out to you. See, I used to think when I failed God, God like kind of went into hiding. It's not God that goes into hiding, it's me that goes into hiding. Because every time that I have cried out for God, He's been there. Every time I've really sought God's wisdom, He's given it to me. It's undeniable, and you know the same thing. We could share testimony after testimony after testimony. 3 steps. You fear the Lord, you follow the Lord, you make wisdom a priority. You make it a priority. I want desperately to know, God, what you know. I want desperately, God, to know what you know about me, about the people around me, about what I'm involved in. Proverbs chapter 2, starting at verse 1. My son, if you accept my words and store up my commands within you, turning your ear to wisdom and applying your heart to understanding. Indeed, if you call out for insight and cry aloud for understanding, and if you look for it as for silver and search for it as for hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom, from His mouth come knowledge and understanding. He holds success in store for the upright. He is a shield to those whose walk is blameless. For He guards the course of the just and protects the way of His faithful ones. Then you will understand what is right and just and fair, every good path. For wisdom will enter your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. Discretion will protect you, and understanding will guard you. Search for it. God, I want your wisdom. Isn't it amazing that a young Solomon didn't pray for his enemies to be defeated, didn't pray for more money, didn't pray for health, didn't pray for a long life? He just said, God, I got a bunch of people that I'm dealing with, your people. I need your wisdom. But sadly, he forgot that later on. I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be that person. Help me, Lord, to seek your wisdom. What is God's wisdom for you? What does God want for us? We're all sinners. We're not disqualified from doing God's work. God just wants us to turn to Him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Give your life to Jesus today. Make Him your Lord today. Realizing you're not good enough to save yourself, but you're certainly not bad enough to be disqualified either. For God so loved the world that He gave His only Son, that whosoever would believe in Him would not perish but have everlasting life. That's the goal. And then begin that walk, whatever is next. Whatever decision you're facing, ask God for wisdom. And search for it through His Word. Search for it through the leadership of His Holy Spirit. And begin to do that amazing work for Him.